Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for part 3 of our June Q&A series. I think we've just snuck into June, so hopefully that's happened. Anyway, more questions, more answers, and all the questions and answers are going to be good this time. No stuff-ups, no mediocre answers. Let's get into it after a word from today's sponsor.
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and the new Duranaut high-performance thermal paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description.
Okay, we've got an interesting Discord question here talking about ComputerBase's testing. So basically it goes along the lines of ComputerBase conducted a benchmark of Stellar Blade testing upscaling based on their own assessment of visual quality. They are not using FSR3, opting for native instead, but are using XeSS Ultra quality, which they acknowledge is not entirely comparable. Last but not least, the article's author is very confident that other reviewers, such as us, will adopt this methodology. So you can see what they're doing if you head over to ComputerBase's website and look at their Stellar Blade benchmark. But to summarize it very quickly,
we'll put the link in the description.
We'll put the link in the description. Hopefully remember to do that.
Balin, do not forget. There'll be angry people.
So basically they've assessed that FSR3 quality is not up to scratch anymore. So they're saying that in their benchmark charts for games where I think historically they've used upscaling for these sorts of tests across the board, instead of testing all cards at native, they've historically used DLSS on GeForce cards, FSR on Radeon cards. Mm-hmm. They're changing that up a little bit now to say, well, if a game supports DLSS 4 and FSR 4, the NVIDIA GeForce GPUs will be tested with DLSS 4 enabled because all RTX cards can support that. RDNA 4 will be tested with FSR 4 enabled, so that makes sense. However, for RDNA 3 and older GPUs, they'll be using native resolution because they're claiming that FSR 3's image quality not really comparable to the other techniques. To get comparable image quality on those cards, you have to use FSR 3. However, if XeSS is available in a specific game, they might choose to use XeSS Ultra quality, for example. Intel Arc cards, again, same story. If XeSS is available, they would use that. If not, they would use native rendering. So essentially, the main change up there is, we've seen plenty of outlets before test, with upscaling enabled as their main way of testing games. But this is taking it a step further where older cards that don't support the latest AI-enhanced upscaling solutions are run at native resolution so that they have comparable image quality. Which, just before I get your opinion on it, I think their assessment of image quality there is very fair. If you look across how games are sort of being rendered with these technologies, DLSS and FSR4 are significantly better quality than FSR3, especially at lower resolutions, and generally they are better than native rendering as well. So it would make sense that if you were saying, what are the comparable image qualities on each cards, it would be DLSS4, FSR4, and then, native resolution for sort of your older GPUs. But the problem is, of course, that it's not absolutely identical. So there are obviously settings that are, depending on the setting level you're using, depending on the game, depending on the resolution, the differences between those games can vary. With DLSS, for example, you do see more disocclusion artifacts, which in faster-paced third-person titles can be more distracting than what you see on FSR4, but then FSR4 might have more shimmering, less stability in some situations. So it's always that trade-off. It's very difficult to say 100% that those are equivalent, but I think most people would say that the latest technologies are much closer to native than you'd see from FSR3. So there's all of that. What are your thoughts on that way of testing?
I certainly understand it. It does make sense to me. I don't think I would... I don't know if this is the right word. I don't think I would simplify our testing that much because it's a reasonably complicated way of testing, really, because it's no longer apples to apples. You're making some changes there for each one, but simplify in the sense that I wouldn't just do that type of testing. Often when we test a game, we will do like native and then we'll go to like an ultra type setting and we'll do ultra native with ultra with upscaling. So I would still do potentially the testing they're doing, but the bulk of my testing would be at native, if that makes sense, for the more apples to apples stuff, so people can make their own decisions on that. Because really the scaling, it's going to scale fairly predictably. Like if you use FSR4 quality or performance or whatever, you're going to see a certain percentage uplift. And that can be roughly calculated based on the native performance. So you can work out where other parts will or won't scale to.
Yeah, you take the native performance, you go, okay, well, with quality, I would get 30% more, so I would add 30%. Like, if it's only 40 FPS and I add 30%, maybe I get to 60.
Yeah.
That's how it...
Yeah, I've always thought that's really easy to do, but people do like to be spoon-fed exact numbers. They don't like to extrapolate in their head, like to work things out. At least that seems to be evident based on comments and feedback over the years. So yeah, I'm not against the idea. I think it does make sense. It is subjective image quality testing, but I think if we're all broadly on the same page and think, yeah, look, that seems reasonable, those quality settings and whatnot to compare, then I think as additional testing, that's a pretty interesting test method and something that we could use. I struggle to see a future where we would only test that way, though, just because... Well, there's probably a few reasons, but one that pops to mind is, first of all, not all people like to enable those technologies, or they have different ideas about what levels of things they do or don't like to enable. And then there are certain games where you just don't use that stuff, or it's suboptimal to do so. A lot of competitive multiplayer shooters and stuff, and we try to make the content that we produce sort of to cover all aspects of gaming, and which is, I come from more the competitive shooter side. Tim comes from more the story-driven single-player side, and we try to mesh those things together in our review to give either one of those types of gamers, or people that dabble in both, a good overview of what the performance is. Now, in the ComputerBase example, they are testing just one game with this method, which is Stellar Blade, which probably makes more sense for that type of game, and probably less so for like a Fortnite or Apex Legends or something like that. So...
Yeah, there's a few other complications that come to my mind as well. I guess one of them is that some people have much more heavily prefer the FPS performance than the image quality, even in single-player titles. So even though something like FSR 3 may not be up to scratch quality-wise, there are still people that enable that feature anyway because they prefer the higher FPS output. Even though the quality is obviously not very good, because they just go, okay, well, I'm sort of tossing up, do I want to play at 60 FPS with the stable image, or do I want to play 90 FPS with the unstable FSR image? And they make that call. It's ultimately a personal preference choice, and they say, I prefer the way the game feels or the smoothness of it, even though I understand that the image quality is obviously being hurt by enabling that feature, which again, you don't get that on FSR, so the FSR4, for example. So there's obviously differences there, but that is potentially one reason why you wouldn't test this way. Another thing that comes to my mind is if you are applying this broadly across, let's say it was more of a GPU review where you're testing multiple games, you would have to examine the image quality in every single game, which is extremely time consuming. And it won't always be the case where DLSS4 quality is equivalent to FSR4 quality. It may be the case where DLSS4 balanced is actually the closest match to FSR4 quality, or maybe DLSS4 performance is a match for FSR4 quality. In which case, I guess, the way that they've currently tested is they've just gone, if DLSS is available, we use the quality mode. But then if you're making that call because of the image quality of it, the next logical step is kind of, well, now you really have to start matching it up a bit better. And it could be the case where, again, the performance mode is a match for quality, and you can't make that assessment unless you actually test the game, and not just test the game, test it at one resolution. You have to test that battle at all the resolutions because the quality differences change at all the resolutions. And I think ultimately, again, I'm not disagreeing with the way they tested this for one game. I think it's viable for one game. But if you're talking about a 20-game GPU review, for example, and you're asking a GPU reviewer to go through and analyze the visual quality at 3 resolutions in every single game, you're talking about like half a year of work, I would say, just to do that, just to have the actual facts of like, these are where all the matchups are for the games.
And it's still subjective.
And ultimately is still subjective because, as you would have seen from our analysis, each of the technologies has strengths and weaknesses. And while I would say that, DLSS 4 is generally better than FSR 4, there are certainly areas where that's not true. So
the thing I don't like about the computer-based testing, and again, why I wouldn't do it, is I can agree with it. I can see the logic behind it. For me, it's sort of supplementary type testing.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
It's in my opinion, it's I don't want to use the word bad. It's not good as the only test method, because you're putting a lot of stuff on you, to like a lot of subjective stuff on you, that you've made these decisions for gamers. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think still in a lot of ways native is king. We certainly hear that from a lot of our audience.
It's certainly king. Like, you could disagree that it's king from an image quality perspective, but I don't think you can disagree with it from every GPU is running the same thing. Therefore,
I think to know what the baseline actual performance is the most important thing, to have that, and then you can supplement that with your upscaling testing if you want, or the viewer knows what sort of performance uplift they can get with the image quality that they deem satisfactory or optimal or whatever it may be, and then add that to the equation to work out. Because ultimately these, like the Stellar Blade thing is, well, I want to play Stellar Blade and my GTX 1080 kind of sucks in it, so what GPU do I want? And you look at the graphs and you can work out, for playing that particular game, what the best upgrade option would be, and away you go. So I think that's ultimately what that data is about. And if you have the native stuff, you have all the answers. You can work that out. And then if you have the upscaling as well, then that sort of makes that a bit clearer and easier for you. But I still think at this point in time, the native testing is first and foremost. That has to be included. I really strongly feel that native testing is important.
Especially if it's like our channel, where we're not ignoring the upscaling side of things. Like, there is a lot of dedicated video content you can watch where it really explores and gets into the differences there. I think if you hadn't, like, if you were making these decisions and it was really based on nothing, like you hadn't really evaluated in depth, you were sort of just going, yeah, I'm kind of getting the vibe that, like, DLSS 4 quality matches FSR 4 quality and matches native on older cards. If that was just the vibe, then I think that's certainly not the way you'd want to be testing.
Yeah, for Stellar Blade, for example, I'd want you to pour countless hours into actually making that analysis to work out if DLSS 4 is as good as we've come to believe it to be. And if it doesn't have any, because it could certainly have some sort of issue that in motion or something, it has some kind of issue that you haven't seen in other games that then needs to be patched. And that's the other thing, like, how many patches and updates have we seen to these upscaling technologies that address certain issues that are specific to that game? Or it's a fairly common problem, but it's exacerbated in that game, and therefore the update fixes it. Like,
that's right.
Like ghosting and trailing and stuff that we've seen in the F1 games over the years and things like that. But
I think ultimately as well, what you were talking about before about, people tend to have in their minds the level of quality that's acceptable to them. There are going to be people who, might always use the performance mode, for example, instead of the quality mode. And then ultimately those benchmarks, while they're trying to show you what the quality mode is giving you, the gamer still has to then go and extrapolate anyway to get to performance mode. And so if you had shown native, you can do the extrapolation, but from an apples to apples comparison across all GPUs.
I said it was either the 9060 XT or 5060 Ti, I said you wouldn't use performance upscaling at 1080p. That's crazy. Like, the image quality is really bad. Then I had heaps of people in the comments like, oh, Steve, like, here I am at 1080p performance loving it and stuff like that. I'm like, well, I mean, that just goes to prove, like, I can't, like, we can make our recommendations or let you guys know what we wouldn't do. But then if you go and get on your 1080p monitor and you enable performance mode, you're like, the performance is great, image quality is acceptable to me, I don't really care, this is how I'm going to play. It's like, okay. Like, you would be like, I absolutely wouldn't do that. But
yeah, and then there's other discussions that you come into where it's things like, okay, well, now if we're talking about image quality and that sort of thing, like, how do you go about all the other settings that a game might have to adjust image quality? Like, does an RDNA 3 GPU, instead of using FSR, to change performance, you're just changing from ultra to high settings? And like, I get in some games, you could make a justification that high settings is actually very close to ultra. And so by lowering the quality setting, that would be the way an RDNA 3 gamer would improve performance. Whereas on, maybe a GeForce GPU, you would use DLSS instead. And again, that introduces a whole other layer of complexity. I'm not saying gamers generally would do that, but I think obviously one way gamers have in the past adjusted for performance is changing the quality settings of the overall game. And you're getting further away from an apples to apples comparison. But if you're already accepting that apples to apples is not necessary anymore, then those sorts of things become in play to do for benchmarking. And obviously, low setting games look very different to ultra and wouldn't be acceptable, but there are going to be some times where, maybe you just drop that volumetric clouds and, you gain 10% more performance, and that's better than FSR3 upscaling, so you'd use it that way. So, it becomes really complicated. So I hope at least some people are sort of understanding why we don't just go and test the upscaling in this way across especially the GPU reviews, because of how extremely time-consuming that would be.
Well, I think it's something like this segment we would likely poll with the audience and just see, what their thoughts are on it. And
I think your balance in GPU reviews is pretty good, because you've done native for the standard ultra testing in games using the built-in presets, but then often with your ray tracing performance numbers, it has been with some level of upscaling enabled.
Well,
so you kind of got that double whammy sort of thing there.
Yeah, where it's necessary. So,
anyway,
I'm sure it's something that will continue to evolve.
At least these days as well, it is good that DLSS 4 and FSR4 give a very similar performance uplift. So even if you were testing native, it's pretty unlikely that you're not showing the real world, quote unquote, difference between those cards using DLSS 4 and FSR4.
For products you're recommending now, it's unfortunate for RDNA 3, but we're not recommending RDNA 3 anymore. So,
and this will become less of an issue over time as those older cards start filtering out of benchmarks, and you start seeing the more, as ComputerBase has put it, close upscaling technologies compared. In 2 or 3 years from now, that will be all DLSS 4, DLSS 5, or whatever testing in the same chart. Not really a hardware question, but I want to know your thoughts about the new $80 pricing for games. Xbox seems to be pushing it hard, especially with their mediocre games. At least we have Game Pass for Xbox titles, but what about other publishers? If they start charging $80 as well, will people actually spend that much? It seems more likely they'll lose sales and overall profit. So I'm guessing this is because I think it was Outer Wilds. I forget, there's 2 games. One's called Outer Worlds, one's called Outer Wilds. Wherever it is, Outer Worlds 2 from Obsidian, I think, a Microsoft studio. They put their game up on Steam or whatever, priced at $80. Probably one of the first PC games that we've seen. Nintendo Switch 2 games, some of those are $80 as well. And I think we'll see more publishers price games at $80 US over time. They already went up to $70 a couple of years ago, now $80. And obviously that's very expensive for games. So, what are your thoughts? You don't really...
You're throwing it over to me. The non-hardware... Well, I guess if the game is amazing and provides you with countless hours of enjoyment, then the price is somewhat trivial. Oh, you're such an out-of-touch YouTuber. No, but in all seriousness, if the game provides you with just... Look, some of you guys will know, some of you will be shocked and disappointed to hear that I play Fortnite quite regularly. My kids got me into it. I was a Call of Duty gamer, hated it initially, kind of learned to love it. I play it on the regular. I've been playing it for, since it came out, basically, because Zoe got me into it from when she was a little tacker. She's now 12. So we've been playing it for way too long. I've put thousands of hours into the game. And I spent, I think it was $10 or something for the Battle Pass initially. And once you buy it once, you get it every season. So if you had bought it 4 years ago or whatever and spent the $10, you could have got, it's just skins and crap, but you could have got all that stuff for the $10 because you make back the V-Bucks by playing the game to keep doing it. So it's a one-time investment essentially. But every now and then I buy her things she wants or whatever. I add some things to my account that cost like $40 or $50. And I do that because I'm an out-of-touch YouTuber. No, I just do that because we've spent years playing this free-to-play game. And I'm like, I'll give them some money because it's been great. And that particular game, and this is where I'm going with this, I still to this day sort of can't fathom, I mean, I know why they're incentivized to do it, but how much they update the game. So a few of my friends and that, we've tried playing other games. I've tried getting back into Call of Duty a few times. That's been rough. Just other games are so boring, and you get them and you sort of play them. You're like, this is cool, this is fun. And then you do that for a few days and you're like, I've kind of done the thing now. is there updates coming or whatever? And then it's like, oh, there'll be a DLC in 6 months. It'll cost you $100 or whatever. It's like, ah, cool, okay. But with Fortnite, I'm too old now. I can't keep up with it. Every time I log on, there's like new weapons and new map things and new game modes and new stuff to explore. And, you know, Zoe's all over it wanting me to try. You know, they just added a new Blitz game mode, which is fast and fun and stuff. And it's like a new game. I didn't pay anything for it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm getting at with these $80 games is you're competing with like the Fortnites of the world. Well, there's only really one Fortnite, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. There's other free-to-play games.
Yeah, there's plenty of other. They're not necessarily as big as Fortnite, or some of them might be, but yeah, there's plenty of free-to-play games. Let's not get caught up in that. And you can just go play the free-to-play games, and a lot of them are great. And if even a couple of them are anything like Fortnite, where they just get radically overhauled constantly with totally new game mechanics, you know, it's insane. And it's free. So why pay $80 to get a game that has 10 hours of gameplay or whatever it might be, and then you're sort of done with it? I'm not saying that's all of them, but again, circling back to the start, if you pay your $80 and you get this game that just replayability, or there's just so much to do in the game, or maybe it's a multiplayer game or it's a single player campaign with a multiplayer component that you can play for years to come, and it's really enjoyable and fun, then what I'm getting at is if you spend $80 and you enjoy the game for 2-3 years, that's not a huge investment in my opinion. Am I crazy for saying that? But if you pay $80 and it's like a week and you're sort of done with it, then that's pretty damn expensive.
Yeah, obviously comes down to a value decision on your part at the end of the day, because, you know, I would not consider playing Fortnite fun, and so there's no real value for me, even though it's free. Like, I would rather pay money to play a game I'd enjoy playing. I think with this discussion about game pricing, I think there's not anywhere near enough pricing competition in terms of game prices. And by that I mean, why is every game the same price? That is, when you actually compare the quality you get from different games at the same price tier, the quality varies substantially.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So let's ignore like the $80 price. A lot of games have been $70. There have been some excellent $70 games and some stinky, awful $70 games. Now, I guess it's hard for a publisher to know for sure what the reception is going to be after they make their game. I'm sure lots of publishers are saying, we're very confident our game is great. It's going to have an audience that wants to pay that price. But when you compare like a game of, let's say for single player games, right? Game of the year contenders, usually the best quality games of the year, not always true because of game awards and stuff, but you know what I mean? The highly awarded games are usually the best games to play. And they have the same price as like games that are getting like 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10s, or audience scores are like 5 out of 10, and people think are mediocre. Now, why is that happening? The games that obviously are getting high scores should be much more expensive than the games that are crap. And while that may mean that, you know, I'm not advocating the games become very expensive, but a lot of this is centered around games like, you know, Grand Theft Auto 6. People are being like, oh, I'm so worried that like GTA will be a new price that'll set the bar for all publishers. Why wouldn't they charge $100 or $150 or whatever for what is going to be the biggest game ever that everyone wants to play and is likely to be a very high quality game? I think a lot of people, even if it was ludicrously expensive, would ultimately come away feeling like they've played an excellent game. Now, I very much hope Rockstar doesn't come out and make it $150, but if you could make a case that there are some games priced at $70 where GTA 6 will definitely be worth $150 in comparison. So whenever I see these like $80 price tags or whatever the new price standard is for games, it's like, it's up to the publishers to prove that it's worth that value.
Yeah.
And so if you're making games like, let's say this year I've really enjoyed like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, or, you know, previously people have really enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3, which has, you know, a long campaign that's excellent from start to finish, has, you know, a lot of game styles, there's a lot of innovation in that sort of game. I'm sure a lot of people would have paid $80 for it. Probably would have paid $80 for like an Elden Ring or something like that. But then you come to, I'm not going to name a game because it's obviously going to be controversial, but just imagine some slop game that's very derivative, is a sequel, it's unenjoyable, but it has a brand name associated with it or something like that. And they're also charging $80. Now, why should that be the case? That slop game should be like $40 or $30.
Yeah, I mean,
because it's poor quality compared to the high quality titles.
Yeah. I probably sound out of touch on this subject or whatever because I just don't care that much. Like, if a game's expensive and the gaming community is saying it's not that good, or, you know, from the trusted game reviewers, it hasn't reviewed very well, then I just won't buy that. And games go on sale pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's the thing with PC gaming. I think the $80 thing is a little different because console games don't go on sale anywhere near as often. So if you're if you're a PS5 gamer, an $80 game is going to be $80 for a lot longer.
Okay.
On Nintendo Switch, they basically never discount games, so you know you're going to be paying $80 for Mario Kart forever. So it's very different to PC, where if a game
flops,
if a game is one of those stinky slop sequels that we're talking about,
you probably don't want to buy it anyway on discount because it just sucks.
But even then, it's like it launches for $80. Everyone's like, this game sucks. But then within a couple of weeks, it's $40. And it's like, well, now it's a bit more palatable. It might be a sloppy game, but you know, maybe I'll be incentivized to buy it at that price if I was a fan of that series. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you with what you're saying. That
what was I saying that you agree with?
If the game is good,
yep,
then the price in some ways is, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but it's not as relevant. Right. If it's really good and...
Clip that bit where Tim said I was right, please.
Sure.
But yeah, it's like if I said to you, okay, there's this game that's $150, okay? But it's everything you want in a game. So it doesn't matter if it's single player, multiplayer, whatever. Whatever it is you want in a game, this $150 investment gives you that, and you're going to love the crap out of it for the next 4 years. Like, it's everything you need in a game for the next 4 years. You really don't even basically need to play other games. But you can. But this will be your go-to. This will be your main for the next 4 years for $150 investment. Are you going to be like, nah?
Yeah, like that would sound like great value to me.
Yeah.
And,
and the problem is, that is ultimately the problem. That most $60, $70, $80 games, or now $80 games, they're not that.
That's right. Yeah, so it's... And I think ultimately the market should sort itself out in a sense that, let's say you would have bought a game at $70, but you're not going to buy it at $80, or you would have bought it at $60 but not $80. Then let's say the game comes out, it's $80. What are you going to do? Well, if you don't want to pay that price, you'll just spend your $60 on some other title, and that creates competition. It means that the game publisher is saying, "Oh, our game wasn't worth $80 because people are buying other alternate game for a lower price," and so market forces sort that out. It goes on sale, or they get the message it's not worth that. Alternatively, they are incentivized to make their game better, worth the price that they want to charge for it, and then everything makes sense. Because there's so many games today that you do not need to be paying a price that seems unreasonable to you for a game that you're not 100% sold on.
That's why I don't care.
Yeah, if you've seen a game and you're like, yeah, I'd like to play that, but it's too expensive, and I've got my huge backlog of other titles, just play your backlog.
I would just get the Epic Games Store, even though I think it's an inferior store to Steam and sucks, but I have to use it to play Fortnite. I would get that and just get the free games every now and then.
Yeah, and I think
there's some pretty quality games on there.
I think the question even referred to, Xbox Game Pass, not something I use because I like owning the games and it's useful for testing when games come and go from Game Pass. But Game Pass is much better value than buying every game. You've got a lot of games for a monthly subscription.
I'm going to flip the table over here and I'm going to ask you a question. So I'm adding a question dynamically into the Q&A series.
Okay.
Because I can't work out if it's that I'm old or my opinion doesn't matter because I play Fortnite or a combination of those things.
Probably a combination. Yeah.
We're about to find out. Do you find gaming these days, has it changed at all for you over the years? I know you're like 10 years younger than me or something. But I used to find back in the day, gaming was more exciting in general. As in, I got more excited about games more regularly and I played them more. Like, I played them over more than I do now. And then games these days, it's sort of like you just run through them. You're like, like half of them I don't even make it that far into it. I get bored with it, or I'm just... Is it that I can't work out if I've seen all the game mechanics now, like it's a repetitive thing, like I've seen this before, this isn't new and exciting, it hasn't captivated me, or I'm just old, or Fortnite ruined me.
I mean, I think it's a lot of those things. I think there are more games now that are more derivative of older games, and there's less big innovation in sort of the new AAA titles. Because if I think back a decade ago, today, right, open world games are much more commonplace than 10 or 20 years ago, back when you rarely got like a big exciting open world title. Those are sorts of game styles that I like, right? The Witcher 3 sort of comes to mind as one of those big story driven, well written open world titles. Now there's more of those, but they're not really doing too much different to The Witcher 3. They've sort of taken that style and they sort of mix it around.
They've prettied it up but kind of made it worse.
Yeah, just mix it around, try to do something slightly different. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you get sort of a similar experience at the end of the day. And yeah, like if you've already played The Witcher 3 and then you play Witcher 3 derivative game, then you're not going to be very excited about it. But if you're a newer gamer that never played The Witcher 3, I imagine that the first time you play a game like that, you would be excited by it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of both of those things. There's just so many more games now, so many more AAA style games being made, that there's more chance of games being very derivative and not doing things in a unique way. But then there are games that I play that I get very excited about and enjoy and think are doing things differently and are doing things new. And it might not be, open world's been done forever. Like you can't make an open world game and just be like, hey, it's new because it's open world. But
it's probably a bit more challenging for me as well, being mostly multiplayer focused.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like there are a lot of the multiplayer genres these days are just like they've got the battle royales, and then you see like 10 of those, and you've got the extraction shooters, and you've got the Twitch shooters, and all that.
And my favorite of all time was RTS games.
Mm-hmm, and not as much of a thing now.
Sad.
But yeah, like I think part of it that keeps me going is being a story-driven game. It's some games can succeed not based on mechanics, but genuinely on the story. So a title like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which I thought was really enjoyable from start to finish, had great mechanics. I really enjoyed it, but the story was also a unique story that I hadn't seen before. It really did a good job of telling the story throughout the game, which is very much not the case with every game. There's a lot of very bad storytelling and very bad writing in modern games. So to get something a bit different there was exciting. But then you see people talking about like a Baldur's Gate 3, which mechanically was very different. You can do pretty much anything in that game in a way that previous games didn't let you do. Mm-hmm. So that's another innovative sort of thing that can be brought to the table in these sorts of things. I was just playing Mario Kart World on the Switch 2. They've introduced new modes into that game, sort of like the multiplayer thing, which means that, the standard Mario Kart game mechanic is very similar to the old games. There's a few tweaks and things, but then the new game modes sort of extend the playability, make it fresh and exciting again. Mm-hmm. And so that keeps me excited. But yeah, like getting older, playing more games, there is a bit less excitement than those times where it's like, man, The Witcher 3, that's blown me away. Or back in 2005 when Star Wars Battlefront 2 came out, I'm like, I've never seen something like this.
That was cool, yeah.
Like,
I remember that being exciting. So yeah, not running into as much of that these days.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, a question here that I'm pretty certain we dedicated an entire podcast to.
Probably a controversial podcast, that one as well.
It was a bit. So shout out to the Hardware Unboxed podcast. If you haven't found it, go search for the Hardware Unboxed podcast and you'll find Tim and I having discussions like this, but in sort of longer form. So anyway, we did have a question about the 30. I don't even know why we were talking about 30 FPS gaming.
I think it probably was triggered by something, but I guess the question is...
It was definitely triggered by something. What that something is, I'm trying to narrow down.
Maybe it was like a console game coming out that was only 30 FPS for the first time in a while.
I think it was something like that. Anyway.
So is 30 FPS unplayable?
It's not technically unplayable. It is... if optimal's here and suboptimal's there, for us 30 FPS is somewhere in here.
I think we came to the conclusion in that podcast that
people didn't like the term unplayable.
Yeah, unplayable is probably a bit harsh because it is playable, but it's unenjoyable.
Yeah, you have to sort of get Tim and then get a hammer and sort of hit him just right in the head, and then 30 FPS becomes playable for him. But until you sort of damage a good amount of brain cells, he's going to want like 90.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's games that we were just talking about the quality of games, right? Like there are some games that are going to be so good based on mechanics or story or something that you will tolerate 30 FPS. It's not, you're not going to enjoy 30 FPS.
You might. I'll go outside.
You don't play this sort of games.
I'll go outside and I won't touch grass. I'll mow it, but I'll go outside and mow grass. If I had the option of 30 FPS gaming moving forward, no matter what sort of game it was, just 30 FPS gaming, or doing quite literally anything else, I would do anything else.
I guess you don't play this sort of style of game I'm talking about.
I don't. If it was like Microsoft Flight Simulator or maybe Alan Wake 2, that type of game.
Alan Wake 2 is not great at 30. Like a city building game. Like you can play City Skylines at 30 FPS and it's not awful.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not unplayable.
And
it's not enjoyable.
I used to like those games as well.
But yeah, like obviously I think the main issue with 30 FPS being unplayable, or as we'd say unenjoyable, is that if I had the choice of two games of equal quality, they were different titles but had equal quality. One was a 30 FPS game, one's a 60 FPS game. I'm absolutely going to choose the 60 FPS game. And if I had read online or something that, hey, this game only runs at 30 FPS, that would significantly dampen my excitement and want to pay for the game.
Yeah. And again, it's just a topic that triggers people. Like, people will be upset saying, oh, you guys are entitled or elitist or YouTubers or whatever it is. I have to play at, 25 FPS or 30 FPS and it's just fine. I make do. I mean, more power to you. We're not picking on you. If I was playing Fortnite against you and you were playing at 30 FPS and you were keeping up with me or beating me, I'd be like, hats off to you, man. I mean, that's impressive. Like,
just think how good that person would be if they were actually playing at a decent frame rate.
Yeah, I would be nothing but impressed with you. I would not be giving you crap. I would not be speaking down to you. I'd be like, yeah, I'd be quite baffled and impressed. If you play at 25 FPS or 30 FPS or whatever and you're happy with that and that's how you make do, then that's fine. We're talking about our experiences. Again, when I play competitive shooters, like I want 200 FPS. Like, it sounds absurd to people, but going, if I cap myself down to like 120 FPS playing Fortnite, that doesn't feel good. Like I feel non-competitive to how I would normally be. So over 200 FPS, it's great. Building and editing, much better.
Yeah. I think as well, like, I know people that often complain about our take on this, I guess, comes from like the very low end gaming standpoint. What you were sort of saying where I have to play at 25 or 30 FPS. And I think this discussion it almost doesn't apply. Like, it's unplayable, but it's kind of like that is what you've got, therefore it is playable. I think this is more about making the conscious choice to either play at 30 FPS at a certain quality level or making adjustments so that you're playing at a higher FPS. And I think obviously on consoles, that is often the choice between the quality mode with higher visual quality or higher resolution and the performance mode, lower visual quality but higher performance. And on PC gaming, it would be something like, do I want to play at 60 FPS without ray tracing on a mid-range GPU, or do I want to enable that path tracing setting and having the frame rate drop to 30 FPS? I think I would always choose the lower visual quality setting if the choice was between those two things.
Oh, like if I could play Cyberpunk, ultra quality with path tracing at say 1440p at 30 FPS, or the low preset at 60 FPS, I'm playing with low.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and I think that's where, some console games only come with a 30 FPS mode, and I think there's really no quality setting that should be off limits to get 60 FPS. I think obviously there's some, I want to preserve the visual style of the game. I would sacrifice anything that every visual setting should be on the table to be turned down to hit 60. Obviously there's CPU side considerations for some games as well, but that's just my opinion, that if the choice is between 30 FPS looking brilliant and some downgraded 60 FPS experience, it's like, yes, give me the 60 FPS downgraded experience. I just wouldn't choose the slow 30 FPS mode. And part of that is because 30 FPS game is blurrier and therefore has worse visual quality.
It's so hard to play as well. It's so hard to play.
It's hard to play, but there's always that thing of like, I'm playing at 30 because the visual quality is better, but then it just ignores the whole angle of like, the game is so blurry on a modern sample and hold display that you're actually hurting the visual quality. So you're turning on like a ray tracing effect or something, but then you're blurring the screen. So it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like
I think for me, if I install like a new NVIDIA driver or whatever on my high refresh rate monitor and it defaults to 60 hertz, that is unbearable for me.
You're like getting tortured, are you?
Yeah, to give you guys some insight into where I'm at. When
NVIDIA's practically waterboarded you with that setting change.
A 60 hertz just moving the mouse across the Windows desktop is uncomfortable. As soon as I switch it to at least 120 hertz, it's like, we're okay. We're going to be, things are going to be okay. So, I mean, that's what it is. That's what it is for me. So asking me about 30 FPS is just crazy. But, you know, if Tim played at 30 FPS and he's like, nah, love me Cyberpunk at 30 FPS, can't get enough of it, I'd be like, you are a strange little man, but that's fine. More power to you. Good on you. I mean, the lower you set that bar, really the better off you are.
Yeah, the more you find enjoyment out of much more things, I would imagine.
Tim has an old Mazda that he drives, and he loves it. And he's like, spending more money on a car is dumb. We don't love it, but you make do with it. He drives it. Tim's like, I'm not buying a better car. I'm just not doing it. But then if you did buy a better car and then you liked that, then you're like, well, damn, now instead of spending $1,000 on a car or whatever, a couple of $1,000, now I have to spend $40,000 or $50,000 because now that's the level that I'm comfortable with. So you're better off staying. Never get rid of the Mazda. Stay down there. It's life is much easier.
Yeah.
When I've got that and that's all I need.
Yeah.
So I'm not mocking anyone who is happy playing at 30 or 60 FPS or whatever. I mean, it's a good way to be. So, I mean, yeah. Cool. What are your thoughts on websites about CPU versus GPU bottleneck checkers? Reddit posts say negative things about these websites. Yeah, probably because it's such a difficult subject to cover accurately as to what bottlenecks what. So I imagine we're talking about like, does this GPU pair well with this CPU? Which is the question everybody asks me, and it's a question you can't really answer.
Yes, it depends.
It heavily depends on numerous things. So it's any website's giving you those answers. A very crude, rough estimation that's based on a few things, but yeah, the goalposts can move all over the place on that. So, you know, probably to answer this question, because I could rattle on forever and a day about it and probably spend most of my time just going around in circles, is, and this comes back to like the 30 FPS gaming thing, for example. First of all, like, what's your target FPS? Are you prioritizing FPS? Are you prioritizing image quality? Because those things change the subject massively. Are you single player oriented or are you primarily multiplayer oriented? Because that changes the discussion massively again. For example, if you are a competitive shooter type and you actually want to play using competitive quality settings, whether it be Fortnite, Apex Legends, Call of Duty, in all of those instances, you are almost always going to be CPU limited. Probably not gaming at 4K, but even if you are, you're probably using competitive quality settings with a reasonably high-end GPU. And again, you'll almost always be CPU limited, so you're going to want to get the fastest CPU you can get. Generally, stuff like 5090s are a bit of a waste there. You want more of a mid-range GPU paired with a powerful CPU. So I play Fortnite, for example, using the competitive settings. I am pretty much always CPU limited. I've got like a 13900 KS in there or something like that. Not because I prefer Intel. I was just given it for free, and like at free, it was
YouTuber.
It was a YouTuber thing, guys. That's my defense. But anyway, I use that with a 4090. And the 4090 is just held back by the CPU because, you know, it can spit out many, many hundreds of FPS, but the CPU can only throughput about 300. I say only, but that's just where the limit is. But if I was playing Hogwarts Legacy with ray tracing and everything turned on, then I would be, especially at 4K, heavily GPU limited. So the conversation of which part there, it shifts 100%. So it goes 100% on the CPU to 100% on the GPU.
And so those websites, they're not really doing that sort of testing. A lot of them are very much automated. Like they put into a database somewhere the performance level of all the GPUs, the performance level of all the CPUs, and then they generate web pages that sort of say things like, well, they're basically comparing the two performance levels in their database and making a call based on whatever algorithm they've chosen as to the percentage level of bottlenecks that you will be. That's typically how they work.
They're taking advantage of the question gamers always ask. Because people always ask this. People always want to know, like, oh, if I've got a 5800X 3D, can I pair it with this? And the answer is, again, it depends. What games are you playing? You're going to be CPU limited or more likely GPU limited. That's why people get annoyed with CPU testing using a high-end flagship GPU at a low resolution to isolate the CPU performance. And they're like, well, that's not realistic because I'm almost always going to be GPU limited, which in a lot of instances is true, but we're not doing that testing for that specific reason, and we're not necessarily doing it specifically for you. We're doing it for gamers at large. We're doing it for people that play Fortnite at competitive settings, or Call of Duty using the basic preset, or people playing Hogwarts Legacy on Ultra. So that's that. And as luck would have it, with you sorting these questions, because I don't know if you deliberately put these.
I don't think I did.
This is absolutely as luck would have it. With so many people owning 5800X 3D and probably just as many with 5700X 3D, maybe, how do these CPUs fare against newer ones when paired with the latest NVIDIA 50 series and Radeon 9000 series GPUs? So again, this is a depends question. It was the thing we just talked about. How does a 5800X 3D go with these newer GPUs? Well, there's sort of two answers to that one. But basically, it depends. Are you heavily CPU limited? If you are, you're going to need a 7800X 3D upgrade if you want more FPS, because your CPU is going as hard as it can go. But if you're playing multiplayer competitive games, then you're probably going to be, well, again, CPU limited there, GPU on the single player stuff. But really, to answer this question, we're only talking about an RTX 5090 here, aren't we? Because a 5080, that's slower than a 4090. And we've so the 4090 testing is relevant for the 5080 owners or less. And then the Radeon GPUs are slower than that again. So really the only GPU here that changes the discussion at all, potentially, would be a 5090. But I think the margins you've seen between a 5800X 3D and a 7800X 3D with a 4090 are going to be pretty well the same with a 5090. And again, that's because we use low resolution testing to remove the GPU as the limiting factor there. So you're really looking at pure CPU performance. So the only way that conversation would change would be if a 7800X 3D or 9800X 3D were being GPU limited. But I don't believe that to be the case. People claimed that the 9700X wasn't performing that well relative to, say, the 7700X because it was GPU limited, which was a bizarre claim to make because the 7800X 3D was in the same chart showing much more performance. So there's no evidence yet that those results shown with the 4090 were GPU limited, because, again, the 9800X 3D ended up being much faster than the 7800X 3D. I was going to say much faster, but it was only much faster in my head because we weren't expecting it to be as fast as it was given the non-3D Vcache models. So anyway, that's the question really. There's only one GPU that would be relevant for it, and anyway, it depends on the games you play and how you play them.
Yeah, but I think I guess, if you were comparing like a mid-range GPU from the 40 series to 50 series, the 50 series is faster at the same sort of price range as it was previously. So I guess you could say that in a typical game, you'd be more likely to be CPU limited if you were getting a faster GPU this generation, but it hasn't changed that much. Like, we're not talking about...
I think games becoming more CPU demanding has probably changed more than anything.
I think that's right, because we have seen over time that a part like a 5800X 3D, even in single player titles, it used to offer triple digit frame rates in those heavily intense games, but these days it might not even reach there in the sort of today's really flagship CPU heavy single player titles. But again, like, whether or not you can reach that level of throughput is highly dependent on your GPU. So if your GPU can also not do triple digits in that game, then it's not going to be an issue. But obviously over time, yes, it becomes more likely to be CPU limited in situations, but I wouldn't have thought this generation has changed enough to sort of make it like, oh, previously it was fine, and now it's really not fine.
And again, if you're playing single-player titles and you find that your CPU is limiting you to 60 FPS, you got one of two options. You can either upgrade your CPU to fully unlock your GPU, or you can just enable higher quality settings on your GPU to then bring, to better utilize the GPU.
Yeah, that's right. All right, that does it. Q&A series is over. I've had enough of your insults in the outro. There'll be none of that.
Does that mean you're going home now and I have to see you for a month?
Yes, and I'm very glad about that.
Can we do a part 4?
I don't think so. I've had enough.
Yeah, well, okay, fair enough.
All right, what else? If you're interested in supporting the channel, we got Patreon, we got YouTube join button. So there's some pretty cool benefits, bonuses, Discord chat. Steve's actually been making some BTS videos lately. You can see
that's true.
Off camera, there is a nice new room that he has built on his house. You can see all of that via that BTS video. So that could be mildly interesting to you. We really don't do a good job of selling it. It's a very interesting video and you must sign up to watch it.
It's insane. I was going to say free content, but you'd be paying a couple of dollars to see it. It's insanely good value content.
It's very, very good value. And the fact that we did not make a BTS video for months prior to that, just ignore that.
I did 2 though.
Yeah, 2
in a row.
2 in a month. Real good stuff. So go check out the excellent BTS video that is a must watch. Only available to Patreon members.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. So there's that. And that's pretty much it.
Yep.
Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
See you next time.